So I want to take a little time to go over a few features on the graphing calculator. Okay, if you don't personally own one, there's an app that you can download. All right, and you can use that to follow along for now. So let's go to the actual calculator. Okay, so this is the graphing calculator. Lots and lots of features of this. I'm going to show you kind of just what you need to know to get through stuff in this class. So far what we've looked at is we've looked at typing in an equation. We've looked at a table of values. We've looked at the graph. We kind of looked at how to adjust your window. And then we've looked at how to find the solution to a system. So I might make this into two videos, one where we're just kind of like talking about the features of the calculator, and then the other one where we talk about a system. Okay, so first up, let's say we type in an equation. So you turn your calculator on, and let me see, I'm gonna go, whoa. I'm going to go back to just the home screen. So like you turn on your calculator, this is where you're at. Now, let's say you're on a different screen. So like I was originally on the graph screen. If I want to leave the graph screen, all I have to do is hit second mode. So basically all of your calculator buttons have like their main feature. But then if you look above the button, there are things in different colors. And that's what these blue and green buttons help us with. So if you see anything in blue, that's a hidden feature of that button. So like if you look at the mode button, above it, it says quit. If I hit the blue button, and then mode, that'll quit whatever screen I'm on, and it kind of takes you back to home. So I go second mode. Okay, so again, let's hit another button. Let's say we do trace. Okay, well, we don't want to do that. We're like, oops, we hit the wrong button. No big deal. You can go second mode. Okay, let's say you hit stat. Okay, you're like, oh no, there's this crazy screen on here. No big deal. Second mode. That just takes you back to your home screen. So that's like a really important feature to know, is how do you get back to your home screen? Now, as far as typing in an equation, for us, the equations that we're going to type in, they need to be of the form y equals stuff. Okay. So you see this very first button on your calculator, it is the y equals button. This allows you to type in an equation. So I go to y equals, and you can see I already have an equation in here. I don't want this equation in here. So some people just type over the equation, and that's okay on some levels, but you might end up missing something, and then you end up with this extra piece that you don't need. So I say just get rid of it. So I want to get rid of this equation that I have right here. So I'm just going to hit the clear button. So if you go below this circle, like the directional arrows, below that is clear, and that just kind of wipes out the equation that's already there. Okay, so let's type in something super easy. What I want to type in this time is y equals 5x minus 2. I don't have to type in the y equals. If you look here, we could type in 9 equations, okay? The y is already typed in for us. So if you have it solved in the form y equals something, you just have to type in the something. So we want to type in 5x minus 2. So just type in a regular 5. Now the variable is a little bit hidden. So if you look at these two colorful buttons, so on my calculator, they're blue and green. I want to go down to the green alpha button. Directly to the right of that is a button that has an X, T, theta, and an N on it. That is our variable X, okay? So I've got 5X, and then I want to type minus 2. So there is a negative button, and then there's a minus button. In this case, we just want regular subtraction, so we're going to type in the regular minus button, and then 2. Okay, so now I've got my equation in there, and now I can do different things with that equation. The first thing I can do is just look at the graph of the equation. So if you go to the first row of buttons, the last button in the first row is graph. That'll take you to the graph. Now, what I want you to notice, and this is something we talked about a little bit in class, but I want you to notice that here we have an X min, an X max, and a Y min, a Y max, okay? And that's a big feature of adjusting your window. So let's see if I can write on this. I don't know if it'll let me, but we'll see. So this is your yay, X. I'm going to try using a stylus. That might be a little cleaner. So this is your X min. That stylus is garbage. Let's try another one. Okay. Over here is X. This one isn't much better, but we're going to go with it. This is what happens when I use my laptop. It's a little wacky. Okay. So you've got your X min, you've got your X max. This down here is Y min, this is y max. Now notice if you count these little tick marks, starting at the origin, I go to the left 10. So that takes me from -10, that's the x min, and then it goes all the way to +10. That's the x max. So x min, x max goes from -10 to +10, and you're incrementing by ones. Okay. Now, same thing on the y min. If I count, I'm from -10 to +10. And again, I'm incrementing by ones. Okay. So that is a big feature when you're playing with your calculator. Understanding what x min is, that's how far to the left you go. X max is how far to the right you go. And then you can increment your tick marks. So instead of incrementing by ones, you could increment by half, or you could increment by 2 or 5, whatever you want. And then y min is how low, or it's like the bottom of your graph, so how low you go. And then y max is how high you go. And again, you can increment however you want. Okay. So let's go to the window button. So if I go up here, let me stop annotating. There we go. If I go here to the top row of buttons, the second one is the window. Right now, what you see on the screen is the window, okay? We can adjust that window however far left, right, up, or down we want, and we can increment however we want. So if I go to window, let me go back to annotate, and I'm going to erase all this stuff just so it doesn't confuse us. So we're going to erase all this. Erase, 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 erase. Sorry. Okay. So right here, you can see x min is at -10, x max is at +10, and then x scale, that's how you increment along the x axis. That is at 1. I've got y min at -10, y max at +10, and the x scale is at 1. Don't worry about the stuff below that. You're not going to need it in this class. So let's just play around with the window for a quick minute. So let's say I want to make my x min -50. Okay. And I want to make my x max still 10, but let's say instead of incrementing by 1, we increment by 10s. Okay. So let's see what that does to our graph. So again, x min is going to go all the way to the left to -50. X max is going to go just to +10, and we're going to increment by 10. So you can see how this will shift your graph. Okay. So again, along the x-axis, each of these tick marks represents 10. We go back -10, -20, -30, -40, -50. And then to the right from the origin, we go +10. The y scale still goes -10, +10, increments by 1. Okay. So let's go to the window. Let's say we go back -10, 10. Let's say we increment by 1 again. And then let's say for the x min, we do -100 to, let's say, 50. And let's increment by 10s again. So again, we're not messing with the x scale. So the x scale, or the x axis, is going to be negative to +10, incrementing by 1. We're just manipulating the y axis. So now we're going to go all the way down to -100. We're going to go up to +50, and we're going to increment by 10s. So I go to the graph, and there you have it. So it looks a little weird here because we're incrementing by 1 on the x-axis, but remember, this down here is really -100. This over here is really +50, and then we incremented by 10s. Okay. Let's say we wanted to increment by 25 on the y-axis. So we're going to increment by 25s. So we're keeping the scale the same, or not the scale, we're keeping the range the same. So we're still going from -100 to 50, but we're going to increment by 25s. All right, so you can see it changes the tick marks. So you can manipulate your window however you want. Now, let's say you want to go back to just like the factory default. The factory default is -10 to +10 on the x-axis, -10 to +10 on the y-axis, and then you increment by 1. There is a shortcut to do this. So this zoom button right here, it kind of plays with your window, and you don't need to know a lot about this. There are not a ton of features here that you need to worry about in this class, but a really nice one is if I hit the zoom button, if I go zoom standard, that's going to take me back to that factory default. So I'm going to choose option 6, and you can see right away it takes me back to -10 to +10, -10 to +10, incrementing by 1. So that's how you can play around with your window. Okay, now another thing you can do is this calculator will create a table of values. So one of the methods for graphing is graphing by point plotting. So what you do is you take an equation in two variables and you create a table where you choose X values, you plug those X values into your equation, it spits out Y values, then you've got ordered pairs, you graph those ordered pairs, you get a sketch of the graph. Well, your calculator will do that for you, okay? So let's say we go second, and then if you look at the graph button above it, it says table. So to get to table again, you hit second and then graph, and it takes you to this table feature. You can scroll up and down forever. I could do this for hours if I wanted to. Not gonna, but I could. You can scroll down for hours if you want to. Again, not gonna, but I could. All right. This right here tells you what your X values are. And if we plug them into the equation, and remember our equation was Y equals 5X minus 2. So second graph takes me back to my table. So if I take X is 1, I plug it into 5X minus 2, Y is 3. If I take X is 8, plug it into 5X minus 2, Y is 38. If I take X is -6, plug it into 5X minus 2, I get Y is 32. So this creates a table of values for you, okay, which is kind of really cool. Now, let's say you're doing like a word problem and you get kind of like a really wacky equation. Sometimes you want to hone into a very specific part on your table, so you can set your table up to where it's going to start at a certain X value, and then it's going to increment your X's in a certain way. So let's say for this table of values, we wanted to know what half values for X's would be. So like 1.5, -2.5. We could set the table up to do that. So if you look at that first row of buttons, the very first button is the Y equals, the second one is window. So remember, this is your window button, okay? Now, what I could do is I could go to table set, and that'll set up my table to start at a certain point for X and increment a certain way for X. So I would go second window, and it takes me to this screen. This screen tells me where to start my table and how to increment my table. Again, if you do it just default, like what we're seeing here, you're dealing with your X's, okay? So we would tell it where to start the X's at and how to increment the X's. Again, assuming you're just manipulating your X's, don't worry about independent and dependent, just leave it on auto, okay? So let's say we want to start our X's at 0, and we want to increment them by a half. So instead of going like 0, 1, 2, it'll go 0, a half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and so forth. So we're going to increment by 0.5. Now we want to see the table. And the way we get to the table, remember, it's the second feature on the graph button. We just go second graph, and there you can see your table. So it starts you at X is 0, and it increments by 1s. You can still scroll up and down. It just is kind of going to zoom into a specific spot. So let's say we were really interested on what is Y when X is 500. We could go second window, and then we could do X is 500, but instead of incrementing by a half, let's say we want to increment by 5. Okay, so it's going to start X at positive 500, and it's going to increment us by 5. So again, to get to the table, we go second graph. You're looking for that hidden feature on the graph button. And here we can see that X is 500, Y is 2,498. And then instead of doing 500, 501, 502, 503, 504, it's going to jump straight to 505. Okay, so you can increment the table however you want. You can get the table to start however you want, specifically for your X's, okay? So again, if we go back to the table set where it's got independent and dependent, they're talking about your independent and your dependent variable, okay? And the auto is the independent variable is X, and that's what you're setting up here. So let's say we change this to like 2, and then we increment by 1. So again, it starts our X's at 2 and it increments them by 1. So sometimes having that feature where you can see the table is really nice. Now, let's say you're at the graph. So we're on the graph, right? You can do a lot of things from here. So one thing you can do is trace is one thing, and it'll let you move up and down. So you can move your arrows up, down. All right. So if you go left, right, it'll move you left and right on your graph, which in this case goes up and down. You can do second trace, and that takes you to this calculate screen. So this is something that we looked at when we were talking about systems of equations and we were finding the intersection. When you're dealing with, for example, quadratic equations, there's a highest and a lowest point on the graph. That would be your max, your min. You can also look at just value. So what does happen here is if you go second trace and then you choose value, so let's say we choose option 1, it lets you plug in any value for x. So instead of going to the table, let's say you're interested in just one value for x. You want to know what happens when x is 10. So you type in 10 and then hit enter, and it's going to tell you what the y value is when x is 10. So instead of pulling up the table, you can just choose specific x values here. So the only thing is if I want to choose a different x value, I would have to go second, trace, that takes you to the calculate screen, and then I would choose value again. And let's say this time I want to know what happens when x is negative 15. And then I hit enter. Well, shoot, I don't know what I did there. Let's go second trace. Oh, we need to stay within our window. So let's say I do -5 for x, because that's what this window is holding. We go enter, and there it tells you what your equation is, y equals 5x minus 2, and when x is -5, y is -27. Okay, so you can just play around with different things here. Okay, so let's try to plug in a different equation. So I want to show you how to type in a fraction. Okay, so we want to get rid of this equation, so we're going to hit clear. Okay, and this time let's say we want to type in -2/3 x minus plus 1. So there are different ways to type in a fraction. I'm just going to show you the most generic way to type in a fraction. Okay, so the most generic way to type in a fraction is to type it in parentheses, where you take the numerator and you divide it by the denominator. So I wanted to do -2/3 x plus 1. Well, I'm going to start parentheses, and then I want to type in -2, not -2, -2. So I'm going to type in negative, that's the button beside the equals, it's different than the minus button, and then 2. I'm going to divide by 3, and then I'm going to end my parentheses. That is the fraction -2/3. Now we want -2/3 times x. So remember, if I go to the alpha button, directly to the right of that is x t theta n. That'll plug in our variable x. And then I want to go plus 1. So regular plus key 1, and then hit graph. So now we've got a new graph. And from here, you could adjust your window, you could look at the table, you could set up your table. There are several things you could do. We could go to that trace button, and we could move up and down and see what x is and y is at certain points. You can go second trace and look at the value screen. That's where you can plug in a specific x value. It'll pop out a specific y value. You can play around with this. Just make sure you know how to type in negatives versus minus buttons. Make sure you know how to type in a fraction. Make sure you know how to type in a variable, and understand that all of these buttons have their main feature. Then they have their second hidden feature. So anything above a button in blue, to get to that screen, you hit second and then whatever the button is. So again, to get to the table, I would hit second and then graph, and it's going to pull up the table of values. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. It's just kind of an overview how you can plug in an equation, how you can play around with your window, how you can play around with your table of values. Watch it. If you have extra questions, ask those. Okay, good luck.